Okay. I don't know, man. Anyway. I hope, I can't tell.
Okay. I don't know, man.
Okay, well, anyway, I guess we're on. I can't, tell from this, I got two screens on. Anyway, we're getting there. Man, it's hard to figure this, thing out sometimes. So there's just a bit of delay in my screen. So I gotta change screens here. Okay, that's better. Whew, these technical problems. Turn this other device off. Man. Okay, folks. We are here. And welcome. Kawingane Waloma, everybody. Nindashinzi Kike Mark Peters, Ninunjiai Nalahi, up the river from Nahi, Alunapawe Lakawit. And it's good to be here, I'm pretty sure, from what I can see, and everything seems to be working. And this Sunday, November the 8th, beautiful day outside. And here to continue our history of the Munsee-Delaware Nation. It's been a long, arduous history, I know, but nothing like the experience that our ancestors had to have through it, I can guarantee you that. And, it seems we kind of get one step ahead in this history and then take two steps back to recover where we've been. And I was hoping to get into the French-Indian War tonight and our participation in that at the beginning of it, but really there's just, I started making some notes on other bits of information I wanted to add to the reasons why we get involved in this war, and I ended up with 4 more pages of notes, so it looks like we're going to spend all the time going over what leads up to this war, and basically from the years 1749 to about 1755. But before we do that, I just want to say congratulations to our friends and neighbors south of the border in the United States of America. I had a chance to watch the live statements of the Vice President and President-elect Kamala Harris and Joseph Biden last night, and I was very impressed and it was very good to hear what they had to say. And it kind of reminds me of something, I had high hopes for President Trump when he came in. You never know what a person can do, but he kind of let me down, and looks like quite a few other people as well. And Biden and Harris came on last night talking about ways to heal the nation, ways to work together, a more positive attitude and inclusive outlook on the country and the world even perhaps. It kind of reminded me in a way of two people. One Biden, Harris kind of remind me of the Giovanni de Verrazzano when he came along the Northeast in 1524, and the way he was open-minded and respectful and made good friends and had a very open attitude towards the native people he met in that area. And it's quite a bit different than what happened when Henry Hudson came into the area 100 or so years later, and the Dutch West India Company, who were there mostly to do business, really. Hard-nosed businessmen who were there to make money at the cost of everything else, at the cost of human relations and doing what's right and honorable. And I am hoping that things will continue to go the way that Harris and Biden talked about last night, and we can all work towards what the things they had to say, the goals that they set out for us all to try and reach. So again, congratulations. I grew up in the U.S. and went to public school, pledging allegiance to the flag of the United States, so I have some history there as well. But anyway, we're here in Canada today in the Munsee-Delaware Nation, and we're just going to continue on with where we've been, and like I say, go over a bit more of the history as to how we came to be involved in the French-Indian War. So, we're talking last time about a particular area that we had been kind of pushed into over the years. This light green area in between the British on the right in the orange and the French on the left in the dark green. And we were kind of pushed into a position of deciding whether to side with the English or the French as they both moved towards each other. And I just mentioned last time that we talk about these events, this chronology basically of events that are recorded over the years, but we don't really get much of a chance to look into the day-to-day life of the people as much, and I'd like to do that, and I'm going to get to that point at some point in time, and maybe the next time, because it's really important to talk about. At the time that all these events are going on, the English wanting to move into the Ohio, the French wanting to move into the Ohio as well, and us being caught in the middle. Like I said, we'd been on the move for quite many decades, if hundreds of years, 100 or 150 years probably by now, at least 100 years anyway, a continuous movement, and really not having the ability to settle in one place and develop decent villages with good crops and surplus resources. These areas had been somewhat hunted out and trapped out already during the previous Beaver War era, and all the trapping and hunting that happened after that even. So people, on a community level weren't doing so well. There was poverty and disease. Alcoholism was a significant factor in these days, and things just weren't going all that well. And one of the events that began to start occurring during this time was the movement of the Moravian missionaries into these areas. And I've got a little map here of some of their villages. And if you go to the right, you'll see the border of Pennsylvania again. That's the Delaware River going in a zigzag up the right. And the dots on the right are basically on the Juniata River and the Lehigh River, villages that the Moravians established their own communities in that area at these times. And then if you go a little bit to the right, you'll notice Shamoking, and then Wyoming a bit, and then up near the top you'll see Friedenshatten, and that's the north Susquehanna River up that way. And then if you go all the way over to the left, you'll notice Katanning, the place we've been talking about, and up at the top, some other Moravian villages. So they're starting to make their presence well known into the area around this time period. And they're actually offering, I guess you could say, a sense of hope to certain people who are suffering from these problems I've just been mentioning. The hunger, disease, alcoholism, various other personal issues that people had and even families had, who would come to these Moravians and their villages and seek help, and they would offer them a bit of help and hope in this regard. And this is a picture of a missionary, David Zeisberger, speaking to the Munsees, the Delawares, and in one of his I guess speeches he made on a regular basis to people. Many people would come and listen to him, and although not all would agree with him, they at least gave the opportunity. They took the opportunity to listen to him and try to understand what he had to say. And some people took that to heart, and even joined in the congregation of the Moravians to be allowed to live on a permanent basis with them. And I hope to next time perhaps get more into the day-to-day and the issues that existed in these villages during this time. Like I say, in addition to these events that are occurring that we're talking about. And around the same time that the Moravians were coming into the area and preaching their way of doing things, which wasn't so bad. It was very strict according to their own rules, but it wasn't so bad. I mean, there were similarities, I think you could say, between their principles and ours. But at the same time, there were Munsee and Delaware prophets, you could call them. That's what they're noted as in the literature. I don't know if that's the right word in the Muncie languages. Again, we're talking in an English sense throughout all of this, but there's a different way of seeing and understanding things through the Muncie or Delaware language as well. And Neolin here, who is again called a prophet, was a Muncie man who tried to get people to think about returning to traditional ways to a certain extent, and maybe even all the way, practicing our own traditional religion and way of seeing the world and interacting with people, and as well even going back to the point of learning how again to make the types of tools and weapons that we did before contact, so that we wouldn't have to rely on trade goods as much as we were relying on them during this period. And we were relying on them heavily, trade goods, during this time. Those were the items that kept us alive to a significant extent. So I just want to talk a little bit about, again, that we're going to get into these day-to-day things and the Moravian presence and the presence of these prophets that were starting to come onto the scene as well. Muncie prophets, actually, for some reason. And another one of them is this man named Papoon, who at one time actually lived with the Moravians and joined them, but then left and decided to develop his own way of thinking and doing things, and sort of integrated some of the Western ideas of how to do things with the traditional ways and knowledge as well. And there's a book by him, I think this was just recently published, Pacifist Prophet, Papoon and the Quest for Peace in Early America. And it kind of, takes us back to this peacemaking role that the Delawares had somewhat assumed since the Covenant chain times in the 1660s, and how we even continue to try and play that role during these times leading up to the French and Indian War. So I was hoping to get through in a half hour tonight. I don't know if I'm going to do that. I'm trying to make these a little quicker. An hour and 8 minutes last time. That's just a little too long. But anyway, I just need to go over some of these things again. So again, these are missionaries that are coming into the area and our own prophets sort of talking about our own way of doing things at the same time. But anyway, there's a lot of effort to address the issues that people are facing on a day-to-day basis through these ways. But we're going to get back to the events leading up to this war again now, and like I say, hope to maybe talk a bit about more of these day-to-day items next time. So we talked last time or two about this this French officer, Celeron. And in 1749, he made a 3,000-mile trip with 200 men and 30 Indians. It's not clear who these native people were and where they came from. I'd like to find that out, but it's not clear. He made this 3,000-mile trip from Quebec into Lake Erie. And then down you can see just on the upper right, Lake Erie, bottom of Lake Erie, there's a place called Presque there. It's a fort they built there. But if you go down along that trail, he goes all the way down to Logstown, the place we've talked about before. And he meets with the Delawares, the Munsees there. And previous to this, he had been burying these lead plates in the various places he stopped on his journey. And I'm not sure if this is actually one of those lead plates. I can't read the writing, but I think it is an example of one of them. I don't know how they find them, if he buried them, but this is the writing on the plates. And it basically is saying that they are claiming the country where they're burying these plates for France. So you can see that country is basically the same area that the English are claiming, the Virginians and the Pennsylvanians. So he comes down through this area, like I say, in 1749, and he stops at Logstown, claiming this land, but the Indians told Celeron that they're the ones that owned the Ohio, and that even though Celeron was going through here in an effort to get the Indian people to start trading with the French, like I say, we told them, this is our land, get out of here, and we're going to continue to trade with the English. So Celeron's not having much luck. He continues on his journey down the Ohio River at the bottom and then goes up into the western part of Ohio where the squiggly line, and you can't see it too well, unfortunately, but and it's all in French too, so you can't really read it. But somewhere in the middle here where that dot is a place called Pickawillany. And Celeron stops at this place. It's a village of the Miami people, and like I said, we had a long relationship with the Miami people that we visited way back when in the 1600s and even way before that. But Celeron comes to Pickawillany and he meets up with the Miami chief, whose name is Old Breton. And Old Breton tells Celeron as well that they will continue to trade with the English also. And Celeron doesn't like this because where Pickawillany is old French trading territory, really, from way, way back. So Celeron is not very happy about Old Breton, and shrugging off the French who were visiting him. And Celeron tells Old Breton, the Miami chief, that there will be severe consequences for this action of continuing to trade with the English, and reports to his seniors that the Indians are all dispossessed, or rather disposed to trade with the English rather than the French. And I mentioned before that the English actually had much better trade goods. It was kind of like going to, I don't know, like I say, I don't know, Eaton's or the Bay or Macy's or whatever compared to the dollar store or something like that. But the trade goods were quite different in quality, I guess you could say. So during this same time, Britain decides to give this land basically to the Ohio Company, as I mentioned in this particular map before. Around 1749, 1750, Britain decides to allow Virginia to claim these lands west to the Mississippi, basically, and south of the Ohio River. And the English come through Logstown in 1752. And again, just go to Logstown. I think it's on this map. No, it's not on that map. But, holy cow. Anyway, it's Logstown. Logstown, like I say, is on the Ohio, and it's maybe better just to go to this particular little picture here. Logstown is on the Ohio River near what's called the Forks, and this is the English going to Logstown to talk to the Munsees and Delawares there, and they agree to allow the English, the Virginians, Pennsylvanians, to build a stronghouse at the Forks. And like I say, the Forks are, I thought I had a better picture of the Forks here somewhere. I know I do. Where is it? Anyway, the Forks of the Ohio at the Allegheny, or rather the, oh, here we go. Here's a good map of a particular area. I can't see it. Anyway, there's Logstown right there on the Ohio River. And if you go down, there's three rivers here, and that's called the Forks. The Ohio meets the Monongahela, which flows south, and then the Allegheny, which flows northeast. So that's the Forks where the city of Pittsburgh is now, but the Delawares, the Munsees, allowed the English to build a stronghouse, that was called, as it was called at the time. And they came to this agreement through the efforts of a man named Tunagreason, who was what was known as a half-king. And he was a Seneca who was placed in Kittanning with the Delawares and other nations to take part in activities that happened there and to kind of oversee things, in a sense, on behalf of the Six Nations. And Tanagrisan found it a little more difficult when he was there to do what the Six Nations wanted when he was living with the Delawares and Munsees, who didn't want to exactly do the same thing. So he was put in a kind of a tight spot in a sense. So around the same time, this officer, commander in the French Marines, I believe, tells his man Langlade and 300 French soldiers and some Ottawas to go to Pickawillany and punish the people there for their attitude towards the French when they came by earlier, and said that they were going to continue to trade with the English. So I thought I had a better map of this too. But anyway, if you go down to the bottom end of Lake Erie here on the left and follow this river and trail back down to Pickawillany the other way, that's where Langlade and his men, 300 French soldiers and some Ottawas, Western Confederacy people, like I say, probably Chippewas and Potawatomis as well, were sent, and they attacked this town of Pickawillany, and 3 traders were taken. However, 14 Miami people were killed in this attack, and it's even said that Old Breton himself was eaten by the people who killed him. And there's lots of stories of these things that I've heard here and there. I've never seen one single scintilla of actual proof that somebody was sure this is exactly what happened, but there are sure lots of strange rumor type of references to these things about eating people. And the other thing about it is the only time it seems to have ever happened was when the French were around. But in this particular instance, it says that they ate Old Breton for some reason or another. And then a French officer, Mays, and 2,000 men were sent to build forts, and to kick the English out of the Ohio. So we've got the British, or rather the French, coming in and starting to build all these forts. And they aren't just little forts. I mean, these are pretty substantial fortifications, really. I think this might be the one at Presque up on Lake Erie, where we're going to maybe show where its location is. And they're almost all identical in their structure. We've got Presque. Whoops, unlock these pictures. It's taking more time. Sorry about that, but anyway, another fort here. I don't need to go through them all. This is the Presque Fort, French fort at Presque. It kind of shows where it is on Lake Erie. If you go to the left of Niagara Falls there, and it goes down towards the Ohio River, that's Presque. There's just other similar types of forts that the French build, and the English start to build their forts at various places as well. And this is an example of an English fort. Pretty substantial buildings, significant engineering involved in putting these things together, really. This is just an outline of where these forts really are and the direction that the English go in their advances towards taking on the French. At the bottom line, you've got the journey of Washington, I believe, and then the second one is Braddock, and the third one is another army that finally takes Fort Duquesne. And then up at the top, you got the advance towards Niagara. And way over on the right, going into the ocean, you've got an advance that goes up towards Acadia. And, in addition to the Western Confederacy that's joining the French from the west towards the Ohio, you've got many, many native people up in this area in the far right, top right corner in Acadia and over towards Quebec, New France. Many nations, the Micmacs, the Abenakis, and other Northeast nations who are joining the French as well. And as I mentioned previously, many Munsees actually who lived in the Hudson River area moved up into these areas to live with these northeastern tribes instead of moving west with other Munsees and Delawares or northern up into the New York, Susquehanna, Allegheny area. So, like I say, I mentioned before, I'm interested in learning more about these people in the Northeast. They seem to have all absorbed into other tribes, and there are no specific Munsee tribes, nations, or groups from this area any longer, however. So, we've got all these forts being built, and they're kind of, like I say, pretty heavy fortifications. And at one of them, Washington and this man Tenagreason, let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, right in the middle here, it says Fort Le Boeuf. Fort Le Beef or Fort Le Boeuf or something like that. I'm not sure how you pronounce it exactly. I wish I did. But both Washington and this Seneca Half King, Tenagreason, take a visit to Fort Le Boeuf around 1752 or so. 1754 rather, and it's a French fort at the time, but Washington goes there, and he dines with the French commander, St. Pierre, and so does Le Boeuf, and a party of what's called Mingos, which are Senecas and Cayugas who have kind of split off from the Six Nations to a certain extent. But like I say, still have these connections because Tenagreason is kind of, in our villages, keeping an eye on things. While at Fort Le Boeuf, St. Pierre tells Washington that, the French had been in this area 100 years before the English even thought about coming into this area. And he talks about La Salle having come through the area 100 years before. And we talked about La Salle and how he met up with Munsees at the bottom of Lake Michigan in the 1670s or 80s or so. And so the French had established this area as their trading jurisdiction, at least. There wasn't a large French population of any kind there. It was mostly trading relationships. And they called this area the Payton Hut, I believe. And like I say, had quite a long-term presence in the area. And so St. Pierre tells Washington that France had a much superior claim to the area. And Washington and, or rather, one of the other officers for the English start to build a fort near Fort Duquesne here. However, 500 French soldiers come and order them to leave from building this fort, but they actually purchased their tools so the French could continue to build the fort, which they did, and it became Fort Duquesne. So this officer who was starting to build this fort at Fort Duquesne before it was Fort Duquesne is sent home, and as he's on his way home, Washington's on his way to that area to help him, and he gets Tanagreeson, the Seneca half king, to join him in this expedition further up towards Fort Duquesne. And as they do that, they come across a number of, well, I guess a whole, unit of French soldiers. I don't know how many there were, but a few of them anyway. And this turns into what they call the Battle of Jumonville Glen, where Washington's troops surprised the French, and a bloody battle ensues on May 28, 1754. Many Canadians, as they're noted in the literature, are killed. And Tanagreeson, the Seneca half king, is noted for having split the head of the commander of Jumonville at this time as well. And there's no references to where that information comes from, but it's written down and interesting, I suppose. So before this journey to see the French in on the Ohio with Washington, Tanagreeson actually asked Shingas, who we mentioned before, this man here, Shingas, the basically the leader of the Delawares, the turkey, turtle, and wolf people in the Katanning area at the time. And Tanagreeson, the half-king from the Senecas, asked Shingas to join in on his journey with Washington to look at Fort Duquesne, but Shingas refused. And this Battle of Jumonville is basically what is known as the start of what is the French-Indian War. And I mentioned before that it's got two names, the French-Indian War and the 7 Years' War, and I was a bit confused why that is, and I've even seen different dates, 1754 to 1763 and 1756 to 1763, but what it really is kind of like two different wars. There's a war that happened with the French and Indians against the English and their Indian allies that began at this point in time in 1754 with this battle at Jumonville. And then there's the 7 Years' War, more or less between England and France out on the high seas and in European countries, which lasted for 7 years from 1756 to 1763. So that's where the confusion comes in, I suppose, and I hope I've clarified it a little bit, if not muddied the waters. But yeah, like I said, this is the beginning, really, of this French-Indian War when the Jumonville battle took place. And so after this battle, as I mentioned last time, Washington builds Fort Necessity. And then Jumonville's brother, apparently, actually was part of this contingent at Fort Duquesne, and he attacks Washington. Washington surrenders at Fort Necessity, and we've seen the pictures of that and what kind of fort it looked like. And like I say, Washington surrenders after 1 day battle. But one of the things that Washington's men noted at this particular battle which is right here, the battle at Fort Necessity, is that apparently there were Delawares, Shawnee, and as well as Mingos with the French at this particular time. And although the Delawares, the Munsees, the Shawnees, and even the Mingos had made no real formal decision from a leadership sense as to who they were going to side with, it appears, and as I've said earlier, various individuals, warriors, groups of men, whatever, who had their own reasons, decided to get a head start and joined the French in this particular battle at Fort Necessity. I did want to just mention, I've been going over, like I said before, been using Robert Grumet's book, First Manhattans, The History of the Indians of Greater New York. But in the last couple page or two, I've also referred to this book here, The Crucible of War by Fred Anderson. It's a book I read about 20 years ago, and I've kind of been referring to it ever since. It's an incredible book about this war. And it really covers all the bases from a different variety of ways of looking at it, and especially regarding the Crown policy, like I say, which seems a lot different than the colonial policy that seems to have occurred regardless of the Crown policy. So, again, that's just one of the references as well. I've been referring as I go along here, and I mentioned it last time, a bit to an article, a paper called The Emergence and Decline of the Delaware Nations in Pennsylvania and Ohio, 1730 to 1795 by Richard Grimes. And another article I've been referring to, and I will be over this session, is called A Road for Warriors, Western Delawares and the 7 Years' War by David Barr. And I have also been somewhat referring to an article written in 1758, I understand, called The Causes of the Alienation of the Delawares and Shawnees from the British Interests. And it talks about the reasons why we get unhappy with things and decide to join the French, as I mentioned. So, I'm not doing deep research here. I'm using information that's out there that makes sense to me and as documentary type of evidence, I guess you could say. And although I don't necessarily agree with everything that's said in these papers, there's good information to be found in them. But one of the things I've noticed here is that the various First Nations seem to make efforts not to be in battles with each other in particular. So, again, this is this Battle of Fort Necessity that we already talked about. And talked about Shingas not joining in with this battle as well. And the Munsees and Delawares were really trying to keep neutral here. Like I say, we had taken on the role of peacekeepers, I think you could say, from the 1660s or so, and really hadn't been involved in any particular wars that we started or were defending ourselves against. During that entire period, we did join with other nations, the Six Nations, in various battles with the French and down into Cherokee land, and our warriors definitely were involved in a lot of these things, but we had no official, I guess you could say, decisions made to go to war or to have to defend ourselves against war issues for a long time until this time that we're getting to right now. And at Kittanning, this place that we talked about, we've been talking about on the Allegheny River. Just gotta unlock these pictures. So the place called Kittanning becomes a major area for the Munsees and Delawares to well, they've been living there for quite some time and developed a significant village there. Not just one village, there's many villages in that area. So it's estimated that there were some 300 to 500 Delaware warriors in this particular Kittanning area. And this would have included the wolves, the turkey, and the turtle, I'm sure. It's not a lot compared to the populations that we once had, but compared to other armies and nations, we were still what you would call a formidable force. And if you look at our numbers from Logstown and then up to Susquehanna, Wyoming, Shamokin, and the North Susquehanna, there are more numbers to add to this group of warriors that are available. And as I mentioned, the Pennsylvanians had a significant interest in increasing their trade in all these towns along the Allegheny and the Ohio and back further east along the Susquehanna. And we talked about these kind of waves of traders just coming and going. And this wasn't by coincidence either, I don't think. In a lot of cases, all they brought was alcohol, really. And I think that it was kind of used as a weapon, even in a sense. The chiefs of these towns made significant efforts and requests to the governor of Pennsylvania to stop these traders from bringing alcohol into their towns. The governor just ignored these requests and actually promoted more of these alcohol traders to go into these areas. And I would think basically to, like I say, as a weapon of war, in a sense, to make things a little harder for us to get things together. Although we did get things together. There's an interesting little story, I guess you could call it, that comes from this particular time period in the town of Kittanning. And it involves a rat. And the people in the area killed a rat. And they said it was a bad omen that they found and killed this rat, because it had been the only rat they'd seen in this area, the first one they'd ever seen. And they say it reminded them of the first rat they saw on the East Coast, which preceded the coming of the first ship. And the things that happened after that, they compared to seeing this first rat at Kittanning as an omen that bad things were about to occur as well. And they even called bees that were flying around English flies as a nuisance, I suppose you could say. I didn't realize it, but it may be that flies were actually imported from England before, or rather, bees were imported from England before they aren't natural to this particular area. I'm not sure, but interesting thing. But this rat thing is an interesting little comment that was made as well. Like I say, trade was essential, really, to all of these villages. Like we hadn't had time to develop long-term villages and good consistent crops because of the situations we had been in and were continuing to be in. And they'd been hunted out and trapped out, but we still needed these English goods for cooking, for working the land, and food, flour, and all these other things that you could eat that we just didn't have. Uh, and it's sad that various land speculators, governments even of these colonial provinces use our economic conditions as the way to get more land by giving us those things we need to survive in exchange for the land that, although we needed that as well, food just seemed to be that much more important. So, we weren't happy with the English, really, who were coming into this area and wanting to start laying claim to it. But at the same time, we weren't very happy with the French either. We had a village at a place called Venango, which is apparently a Muncie village up the Allegheny, and there it is right at the bottom of this map. If you look at this little town called Venango on the Allegheny River, and that's where Custologa, the Muncie war captain, apparently lived. And well, you can see just above there, Custaloga's town, actually, above Venango. And this trail went all the way up to Fort Presque, the French fort on Lake Erie. And around this time, basically, the French had really basically driven all of the English traders out of this area on the Ohio and the Allegheny, and so that there were no traders to provide the goods and food that we needed during this particular time. The French had driven all the English traders out and hadn't replaced them at this particular time yet. And the French agreed to supply us with these goods and food if we told them we would cease to trade with the English. And the French told us that if we refused to stop trading with the English, they, in addition to getting rid of the English traders, would stop our planting, destroy any crops that we tried to grow as well, basically to starve us out. And these were, leaders are trying to make serious decisions during this time. I mean, we talk about these leaders and we see them in paintings, pictures and such, but, they weren't acting for themselves here. They had villages of women and children and older people and that they had to take care of here. They weren't just guys who could go out and live off the land, had nothing to worry about. They had large villages of people, vulnerable people that they had to think about and care about with these decisions that they had to make. So, just say, yeah, we'll go to war with you and whatever, or go to war with you and whatever. I mean, these are not the easiest decisions to make. An interesting event that occurred during this time was with Custeloga, the Muncie war captain that I talked about. And he and his men, Muncie men, went up to Presque and began a relationship with the French, not as allies, but they were employed by the French actually to carry supplies from Fort Presque at the top down to the Allegheny River area. And Custeloga and his men decided to just take all these supplies and take them to their villages down further, like I say, around Custeloga's town and Venango. And it's reported that they stole all the French supplies, but that wasn't what you call theft. That was necessity, really. That's how needy his people were, that they would have to do something like that. And as this is going on, Tamaqua, the Delaware leader that I had mentioned previously as well, I believe with the Turtle people, talks to Tenagreason, the half-king for the Senecas, after the defeat at Fort Necessity of Washington. And he says, "We have hitherto followed your directions and lived very easy under your protection." And he's talking about the Six Nations. "And no high wind did blow to make us uneasy. But now things seem to take another turn, and a high wind is rising. We desire you, therefore, uncle, to have your eyes open and to watch over us as you have always been heretofore." And then again, it describes this relationship that we had with the Six Nations over the years. It wasn't a war, an aggressive relationship. It was more of a family type of relationship in some instances. I mean, the Six Nations, by the time, like I say, in the 1700s, our population had been reduced from 20,000 to maybe 1,500 people. We could have been wiped out easily by anybody almost, if they really wanted to get together and do it, but nobody did. Instead, we found ways to live together and still have our own autonomy and identities, and lived, like as mentioned in here, is more family relations than anything else. Uncles and nephews, cousins. It wasn't quite the way the English seem to describe it, and people seem to describe it in all these books about conquering and superiority. That people want to think they have a bit more over others, but in the end, it was really just relationships. And this is another example of Tamaqua speaking to Tenagreason of the sort of peacemaker type of attitude that we had during these times. We had no desire to go to war. We were already fairly well decimated in population and other things by this time. And although Tamaqua didn't really want to go to war, and many others didn't want to either, some were quite intent on making a change to things. And even in 1753, Shingus and Tamaqua and Pisquatoman traveled to a place called Winchester in Virginia. This isn't a very good map, but that just shows you where Winchester is in Pennsylvania. They come from up in this area north of Pittsburgh, in the Pittsburgh area, and go to Winchester. They go there, and they also go to a place called Carlisle in Pennsylvania. And you can just see it here. Carlisle. Just looks like off the west branch of the Susquehanna. And they go there to stand beside the Shawnees and the Mingos, again, the Senecas and Cayugas, seeking the English support against the French. So, I mean, they're going out of their way to try and not get involved, or at least even side with the English against the French. Traveling all the way to, like I say, this place in Virginia and Pennsylvania to talk to them about supplying them with goods and arms to fight the French. However, these offers were ignored. And even when they were made once again in 1754, they were ignored again, causing the Delawares to tear up this treaty that was made in Logstown in 1752. And they told the English that, and the Virginians, that they didn't want this stronghouse, this fort built at the Forks anymore. And they didn't want any settlement coming into the area. They just were beginning to feel like the English were not giving back what the Delawares were offering, I guess you could say. So, after Washington's defeat at Fort Necessity, it seems that the English left the Delawares to take this matter into their own hands. And word began to circulate that what the French tell them of their brothers, the English, what the French say of their brothers, the English, is too true, that it is the English who are afraid of the French. And so these attitudes started to circulate that the English might not be quite the powerful people they are saying they are. And around the same time, Pennsylvania secures land, basically all of the land west of the Appalachians. And if you take a look at the Appalachians here, you see on the west the Allegheny Plateau, but it's mostly into western Pennsylvania and Ohio. And so, during this time when things aren't really all that stable, and relations with the Delawares are kind of getting bad as it is, and we'd already been defrauded out of all of our lands in New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania had done some really below the belt type of stuff with regards to our lands already. And now, all of a sudden, they're making claim to all this land west of the Appalachians. And Conrad Weiser, who I mentioned before, a diplomat who lived with the Iroquois for the Mohawks, I believe, for 16 years or so. He was an interesting guy, but he really wasn't on the side of the Delawares, that's for sure. He comes into the area, Logstown and Katanning, and he tells the Delawares there that the land is basically there for a hunting cabin only and would be settled all the way from the Allegheny to the Ohio. So basically telling us that we're just there temporarily until settlers come and take it from us. And this is Conrad Weiser telling that to us. So in addition to this land being given west of the Appalachians and Conrad Weiser coming and telling us about it and that the land's going to be settled eventually, in the article I referred to, The Warrior's Road, it's noted as an ill-timed and tactless decision that would come back to haunt Pennsylvanians for years. And in June 1755, Shingas, again, and a delegation of wolf, turtle, and turkey people went all the way to Maryland, and they went there to meet with General Braddock, who had just come into the area, who we talked about a bit before. Anyway, here's Maryland. They go all the way there, again, in another attempt to try and keep this relationship good with the English. They went to offer Braddock some assistance if he would guarantee their land. And Braddock told Shingas that no savage shall inherit the land. And Shingas said that if they did not have the right to live on the land, then they would not fight for it, with the English at least. So, we've got this incredibly rude attitude of the English towards us after taking all our lands and now coming into the area to look at fighting with the French and still disregarding us entirely and dismissing us. So, as I have mentioned before, we were caught like between a pair of scissors, as I'm going to talk about more when we get to the American Revolution, as described by one of our own people, to John Heckwelder. And if you take a look at this map, you can almost see a pair of scissors. The light green area is caught in the middle there. And we kind of had to, as noted in the paper, the Warriors Road, had to choose between the lesser of two evils, really. We couldn't reason with the English through diplomacy as far as offering them our alliance, but wanting assurances of land at the same time. And at the same time, we didn't want the French to come into the area because they wanted to claim the land as well. So we didn't want to join either side, but we really didn't have a choice. And as well, the French had the backing of the Western Confederacy by this time, who were our old friends and even relatives. And I think that's a major part of the reason that we make the decisions we do. And we decide to wage war against the colonies while the French had their war as well, in the sense that we didn't really join the French in any sort of treaty or agreement or accept their war belts. But as the French were trying to take the Ohio, we used that opportunity to have our own war with the colonists that had taken our land. Braddock and his statements towards us and his treatment towards us was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, as I mentioned before, in this particular instance. And Shingas said that after Braddock's defeat, we, the Delawares of the Ohio, declare war against the English. We have been their friends for many years, actually about 100 years already. But now we have taken up the hatchet against them, and we will never make it up with them whilst there is an Englishman alive. And this is a, serious statement, but given the population differences at the time, it's kind of a futile statement, I suppose you could say. 1,500 Delawares to 1.1 million settlers and colonists. As I mentioned, there's just not much chance there. But that's how angry we were and how desperate we were, I suppose you could say. How can we fight the French and the English at the same time when they're coming at us? We had to make a choice. There was just no other two ways about it, really. And given our treatment and the attitude of the English towards us, the decision we made was to go to war against them. And by striking terror into the colonies, I think we were hoping that we could get some agreement or treaty of guarantee for the lands that we were about to lose, or at least that the English wanted to take and the French wanted to take. In the end, at this particular time, before we get to that, I guess you'd say that the French did offer these things that the English weren't offering: the food, supplies, guns, ammunition, all these things that we needed to live, really, but could be used for war as well. So, like I say, we're caught between this pair of scissors and we have a choice to make. And like I say, it's choosing the lesser of two evils. And we decide to join with the French for about 3 or 4 years. And I'm going to get into that next time, I hope, if we don't talk more about the day-to-day life things that I mentioned earlier. But, although it may seem strange, we don't join with the French, but we do get involved in our own little war against the colonists, the English colonists. And then 3 or 4 years later, we change our attitude and come back to being friends with the English. And then about 20 years later, when America decides to claim its independence and fight against the British, we side with the Americans, the Virginians, who we have this long-standing problem with, and George Washington, against the British this time, and which leads to this coin that I talked about before, about this treaty from 1778, guaranteeing the Delawares a 14th state in the United States of America. And somewhat after that, we tell them, after what they did to us not long after that treaty, that we're going to side with the British. So it's all pretty strange, pretty interesting at least. But it just shows you how life is, how countries, nations operate. You can be at war at one time and then look towards peace at another. And I'm not going through all this with any intent to, I guess you could say, lay blame or cause divisiveness. I really just want to explain the facts a bit more from our point of view about what happened, I guess you could say, because it's not really in the history books. You see our reactions to the things that were done to us, publicized and made well known all over the place. But you don't see the reasons why, but that led up to these things anywhere. And I think they're important to talk about. So, boy, been an hour and 15 minutes already. I can't believe it's taken this long. But anyway, that's it for today. Like I say, just wanted to provide a few more details on on why we make these decisions we make during the lead up to this war, and I think I've done it as thoroughly as I can for now. And like I said, we might get into some day-to-day scenarios, what it was like for the people in these villages during this time, if we don't get right into this French and Indian War next week. So, just like to say, the Pishkanawaloma, and it's good to be here again, and we'll talk to everybody next week around 2 or 3 on Sunday. Anishik.